Lewis Hamilton has just delivered his most alarming Friday of the entire season in Qatar, and the new evidence inside Ferrari confirms something far more serious than a simple lack of pace. The internal report reveals that Hamilton was eliminated in the first segment of sprint qualifying with a 1-minute 22.043 lap, almost 0.8 slower than the line needed to advance, and the team admits the car was fundamentally out of its operating window. Even worse, the data shows Hamilton ran a higher downforce setup than Charles Leclerc, which destroyed his straight-line speed at a circuit that demands high-speed stability, leaving him exposed in every performance metric. Before I break down why Ferrari believes this result marks a deeper crisis, make sure you subscribe right now, because Qatar is exposing the raw truth behind Hamilton's most difficult season of his entire career. The opening day in Qatar became an immediate red flag for Ferrari as Lewis Hamilton delivered another elimination in the first segment of sprint qualifying. The internal report confirms he finished 18th with a 1-minute 22.043 lap, which placed him almost 0.8 away from the time needed to progress. This performance was a continuation of the same structural weaknesses he suffered in Las Vegas and highlighted the fact that the Ferrari SF25 cannot generate the front-end response required for this type of circuit. The team described their early pace in practice as an illusion that evaporated as soon as qualifying began. Hamilton entered sprint qualifying already compromised by a setup choice that placed him at a disadvantage. Ferrari confirmed he opted for a higher downforce rear wing compared to Leclerc to improve stability in the fast corners. However, this decision came at the cost of crucial top speed on a layout built around long arcs and extended throttle application. Higher downforce should have offered him confidence, but instead exposed the deeper aerodynamic limitations of the SF25, which continued to resist rotation and forced Hamilton to fight understeer throughout the lap. This created a situation where no amount of driving precision could compensate for the car's fundamental imbalance. The lap itself was further damaged by heavy traffic in the final sector. The report states Hamilton encountered Leclerc, who was being slowed by Max Verstappen, creating a multi-layered blockage that destroyed Hamilton's tire preparation and robbed him of momentum. While the traffic clearly compromised the lap, the internal data makes clear that even with a cleaner final sector, Hamilton lacked the underlying pace required to advance. His radio message, "The car will not go faster," was not frustration but resignation, a statement that matched the position of the engineering unit reviewing the data. Free practice one also revealed a pattern that explains the depth of Hamilton's difficulties. While Leclerc posted deceptively strong times, Hamilton spent more than 30 minutes without radio communication, which prevented him from giving feedback about the car. Ferrari's report confirms he also suffered from inconsistencies in the power-assisted steering system, especially in high-load corners. These issues are particularly punishing in Lusail, where the car must remain balanced through long, sweeping turns. Without communication, Hamilton entered sprint qualifying blind regarding how the car would behave in critical sections of the lap. The SF25's structural weaknesses became even clearer as the day progressed. Ferrari confirmed they stopped development months ago to shift all resources to the 2026 regulations, leaving the current package unchanged despite the evolving technical demands. The car suffers from chronic front-limited behavior, which produces predictable understeer in high-speed corners and prevents the drivers from committing with confidence. This creates a situation where the more the driver pushes, the less the car responds, making the SF25 fundamentally unsuited to the demands of Qatar. Tire strategy adds another layer of concern for Hamilton. With the rule limiting every tire set to 25 laps, the team must build the weekend with strict discipline. Starting 18th in a sprint race with no pit stops means Hamilton cannot rely on tire offset or strategy to recover places. The internal analysis notes that the car suffers more degradation than McLaren and Mercedes on high-energy lateral circuits, reinforcing the likelihood that Hamilton's sprint will be a session of data collection rather than a realistic fight for points. The psychological impact completes the picture of a difficult opening day. Hamilton's comments reflect a driver who knows the limitations he is facing and recognizes that the SF25 has reached the end of its development path. His remark that the weather is nice when asked about expectations for the weekend reflects a shift from strategic optimism to emotional distance. Ferrari analysts conclude that Hamilton's best outcome for the sprint is survival, and his realistic target for the main race is simply attempting to reach the top 10, which would already be an exceptional achievement given the state of the car. The core problem for Lewis Hamilton in Qatar is that the Ferrari SF25 cannot operate inside the aerodynamic window required for a circuit built around long, high-speed corners. The internal analysis confirms that the car consistently under-rotates at corner entry, especially through the long arcs that define the first and final sectors. This chronic understeer forces Hamilton to delay throttle application and carry reduced speed through the apex, which accumulates time loss across the entire lap. Even when he adjusted his driving approach, the limitations remain structural rather than situational, which makes Lusail one of the most punishing venues for this specific car profile. A second problem emerges from Hamilton's high downforce configuration. Ferrari makes clear that while the intention was to provide stability in the fast sections, the higher rear wing immediately placed him at a disadvantage on every straight. Qatar rewards aerodynamic efficiency and a low drag philosophy, which is why McLaren and Mercedes prospered during the same session. Hamilton's setup provided balance, but removed the top speed required to defend or attack. This meant that even in clean air, he could not match the acceleration of rival cars and was effectively competing with a package that was misaligned with the circuit's demands. Communication failure during free practice 1 created the third major issue. Hamilton spent more than 30 minutes without full radio access, which prevented him from giving real-time feedback about front grip levels, corner balance, or tire temperature evolution. Ferrari could not make targeted adjustments because they lacked detailed driver input. When a car already sits at the edge of its performance envelope, communication becomes a fundamental tool, and the absence of this channel left Hamilton entering sprint qualifying with an incomplete understanding of how aggressively he could attack key corners or where the car was most vulnerable. Traffic further exposed the extent of the problem. Hamilton encountered his teammate Charles Leclerc, who in turn was compromised by Max Verstappen. This multi-layered traffic block destroyed Hamilton's tire preparation during the most sensitive portion of the lap. Modern qualifying relies on perfect preparation for the final sector because tire temperature directly determines grip levels. The blocked sector forced Hamilton to enter the final corners with tires outside the optimal window. While the incident cost him time, the internal data confirms that even a completely clean lap would not have been enough to escape elimination, which shows the depth of the deficit. Another structural issue lies in Ferrari's development strategy. The report explicitly states that Ferrari halted work on the SF25 months earlier to shift resources to the 2026 regulations. While this decision may secure future gains, it has left the current car stagnant as rivals continue to evolve. The SF25 lacks updates that would compensate for aerodynamic weaknesses and tire management limitations. This decision has created a growing performance gap that becomes most visible on circuits like Lusail, where mechanical grip and aerodynamic stability must work together. Hamilton is therefore attempting to compete with a car that has reached its ceiling. Tire behavior adds another layer of difficulty. The Ferrari struggles to generate consistent temperature on the front axle, which increases understeer during the most demanding sections of the lap. Qatar's high-speed corners require the front tires to maintain temperature through heavy lateral load, yet the SF25 cannot sustain the necessary energy. This forces Hamilton into conservative lines that protect the tires but sacrifice speed, which becomes particularly damaging in a sprint format where there is no time to recover track position through strategy. The final problem is psychological. Hamilton's comments reveal a driver who no longer expects a car to deliver meaningful performance, and this emotional shift influences his confidence when attacking corners at high speed. When a driver senses that the car cannot support aggressive inputs, it becomes difficult to push to the limit. The internal briefing suggests that Hamilton has transitioned into a mindset focused on survival rather than competition, which is understandable given the car's limitations. This emotional landscape underscores the broader challenge Ferrari faces in maintaining morale during a season defined by diminishing performance. Ferrari entered Qatar carrying immense engineering pressure because the SF25 has reached a stage where its weaknesses cannot be masked by setup adjustments. The internal report explains that the car operates with a narrow aerodynamic window that collapses when circuit demands shift toward long, high-speed corners. Lusail forces the chassis to maintain stability through extended lateral load, yet the SF25 loses consistency across these phases, which forces the engineers into defensive compromises. They cannot optimize both downforce and balance simultaneously, which leaves the drivers working with a package that lacks flexibility and limits performance regardless of the strategy chosen. The engineering team also confronts a persistent dilemma with ride height. Lowering the car would theoretically improve aerodynamic efficiency, but increases the risk of instability when the track surface becomes uneven through curb usage. Raising the car removes this instability, but sacrifices downforce in the middle of the high-speed corners where Hamilton already lacks confidence. Lewis punishes any compromise, and the briefing makes clear that engineers were forced to select a ride height that protected the car rather than maximize performance. This decision cost Hamilton time in every long corner and reduced the platform stability he needed to attack. Steering behavior introduced another fundamental challenge. Ferrari documented irregularities in the power-assisted system during free practice, one which created inconsistencies in corner rotation. The steering sometimes delivered a heavier sensation than expected, and on other laps provided sharper response, which prevented Hamilton from developing a predictable rhythm. Lewis requires a stable steering feel because drivers must commit early to high-speed lines and trust that the front end will react consistently. The engineering team acknowledged this limitation, but reported that only partial corrections were possible before sprint qualifying. Tire management created an additional layer of engineering difficulty. The regulation limiting every set to 25 laps for the race forces teams to ration tires carefully across practice and qualifying. Ferrari therefore had reduced flexibility to experiment with different balance options. The internal analysis shows that Hamilton entered sprint qualifying on a set that delivered acceptable warm-up but suffered from inconsistent temperature retention through the longest corners. Engineers identified that the lack of front tire energy directly reduced Hamilton's ability to generate rotation, yet the tire restrictions prevented them from exploring alternatives that might have improved the situation. Ferrari's halted development program places the team under even more pressure. The report confirms that all resources have been redirected to the 2026 project, which means the SF25 is effectively frozen from an engineering standpoint. Rivals continue to unlock small aerodynamic gains, while Ferrari must rely on setup optimization rather than true performance evolution. This places the engineering team in a reactive position where they manage weaknesses instead of building strengths. In Qatar, this dynamic becomes especially damaging because the track exposes every area where the SF25 has fallen behind the competition. The difficulty is compounded by the need to balance performance between both Ferrari drivers. Charles Leclerc managed to extract more potential from the car earlier in the day, which created a misleading perception that the package could perform at a competitive level. However, the engineering notes clarify that Hamilton's issues extend beyond driving style and are rooted in how the car responds to his preferred rotation patterns. The SF25 does not allow him to lean on the front axle and cannot deliver the precision required for his approach in long, high-speed sequences. Engineers must therefore work within a constraint that directly limits Hamilton's strengths. The final engineering pressure arises from the sprint format itself. With no pit stops permitted, the car must deliver stability from start to finish without the opportunity to modify balance or tire plan. Hamilton starts 18th and cannot rely on strategy to recover ground. Therefore, the entire burden shifts to the engineering integrity of the car, which is currently the weakest element of the weekend. The report concludes that Hamilton must treat the sprint as an evaluation run to gather data for the main race, and that the engineers will use this information to search for marginal gains. Yet even those marginal gains may not be enough to overcome the structural limitations exposed in Qatar.